vehicles down there and more. This was one that Elon was involved with as well, and yeah, it's nerve-wracking, but somehow it works.
Yeah, and although it's difficult, I think we have been laying the foundation to be as intimate to all the tiers of the supply chain, building that control and directing the different tiers of supply chain. That's the way we are trying to mitigate the risks that come with it. Again, dual sourcing, triple sourcing, having redundancy is the way we've been trying to mitigate for it.
Yeah, on that point, when we think about vehicles, when you think about 3Y as an architecture, SX as an architecture, our next generation platform is more than one segment, and really we're thinking about all the segments that are available that we haven't captured and where the market would be, and designing it with our supply chain partners so that we can go quickly through those segments for where we need. But to Elon's point, if you make a car desirable and affordable, oftentimes it doesn't necessarily matter what segment it's in, because it's one that you want. And we've seen that with Model 3 when a lot of people thought the sedan was not going to be a great hit, but we sell tons of them. So the next generation platform is not one vehicle, it is multiple, and it's on a segment that we will really try and focus on that affordability and desirability point moreover than where we started.
Yeah, I mean, there's like, I think, it's an old saying, like, battles are won with tactics, wars are won with logistics. The logistics challenges here are enormous. And when you start like being a very significant percentage of an industry, you can't overcapacitize. It's not realistic. And some of these things, like you said, like, well, you dual source or triple source, you can do that maybe for small things, but you can't do it for big things, because if you're triple sourced, and it's like having a plane with 3 engines, where if any of the 3 engines fails, you crash. It's like, so and you have to either overcapacitize, which drives your CapEx up, and it has idle suppliers somewhere and big warehouses, or you design to some overage that's, reasonable, and then you have expedite costs because inevitably there's something goes wrong somewhere and you've got to fly things around. So it's really just the rate of progress is the rate at which we are able to scale 10,000 logistics problems. The most significant of those is the cell production. And so we actually deliberately try to overdo cell production or cell supply to have that exceed what is needed in vehicles. Because if it goes below what's needed in vehicles, then the factories stall. But then what do you do with all these extra cells? It's like, well, okay, so the much easier thing to scale up and down is Powerwall and Megapack output, stationary storage. So we can then overcapacitize in cells and packs and scale production of stationary storage, which is much easier to scale than vehicle production. So that's strategically, I think, a good thing. Yeah, I mean, the CapEx for Megapack is tiny compared to CapEx for vehicles. Also, Megapack demand is quasi-infinite. It basically, as long as we are competitive with utilities, we can sell as many like, yeah, quasi-infinite demand for that, really. Or many terawatt hours. And we got a long way to go to get to many terawatt hours per year.
Dan? Let's go to Dan.
Thank you. Dan Levy, Barclays. I think we know competitive dynamics differ significantly by region. We know cost dynamics differ by region. We saw that with your China Gigafactory, far superior cost to what you had at Fremont. I realized it was a new factory, but there are clearly different dynamics. So to what extent are the cost strategies that you've laid out today, do they differ by region, or is there more of a global one-size-fits-all approach on reducing cost?
Yeah, I think we're pretty consistent on the strategy here. We'll try to as much localize it as possible. Like in China, 95%, over 95% of our supply chain are localized, all the way from the first tier to the second tier, even to the third tier. And that give us, generate a tremendous savings on COGS. We also have a very localized labor force. We have access to skilled labor force in the region, and Yangtze Delta region in Shanghai, I'm particularly referring to. Among over 30,000 of employees in China, we have probably less than 20 expats. So it's very deep localization we have done there to be able to have such cost structure, and we try to replicate this approach elsewhere in different gigafactories. Of course, supplier bases are different. The labor market are different, region by region and country by country. But we try our best to localize. I think that's absolutely give us an advantage to compete with the auto OEMs around the globe. Another thing is, we have this direct selling mode. Like Zach said, we save a tremendous money on OPEX as well. We have full control over all the expenditures across the company, and we don't spend money on marketing or advertising. Everything we saved will become the value we can offer to the consumers. So on that part, we also follow pretty consistent strategy over the years.
I mean, certainly the manufacturing stuff that Colin, Pete, and myself talked about, whether you make it here or you make it in Europe or you make it in Asia, it applies everywhere. We think about that from the ground up, not specific to any region.
Yeah, just one thing I would add to Tom's point about localization and to Lars's point here. But I would actually say that we're moving in a direction of more standardization in terms of our factories and our processes and our cost reduction approaches. So as we've been thinking about the next generation platform, we've been thinking about the volume that we aspire to build against that, how many individual factories do we need to build, and what is the fastest possible way to expand that footprint around the world. What we've done with Model Y is each factory is an incremental improvement of the previous factory, which requires engineering hours, engineering spend for each factory design, and then you end up with factories that are slightly different from each other. And as we move towards the next generation platform, I think the term you use, Lars, is copy-paste. So to get it right from the first time, certainly there will be things that we learn and we replicate and we make adjustments to, but try to have as much standardization and commonization as possible, which allows us to go as quickly as possible with expansion.
Overaka on this side.
Thanks. Two questions, one for Zach and one for Ashok. So for Zach, how do you think about the long-term growth and operating margins for the business? And when we look at 150 to 175 billion in CapEx, is the remaining balance of that, is that essentially the CapEx guidance through 2030? For Ashok, the multi-trip reconstruction that you highlighted, how is that different from what Mobileye does with the REM map that they have? And can you give us any color on the AP4 hardware?
So with respect to operating margins, we intend to continue to improve operating expenses as a percentage of revenue over time. And we're continuing to take cost out of our products and try to keep gross margins at a place that's healthy as well. And so, from the hardware perspective of the business, it's our expectation that we'll continue to stay in a healthy place over time. And then there's a software portion that's added on top of that. And so Elon has commented on this many times about the impact that full self-driving software can have on the economics of the business. And in that space, profitability, operating margins would be impacted dramatically. Specifically to your point about CapEx guidance, the intent of that slide was not to provide specific guidance, but to just be transparent about internally what our rough estimates are and to provide context that we think getting to 20 million vehicles per year and 1 terawatt hour of energy storage is very feasible relative to our expected cash generation for the business. You know, that's a number that will move as we learn. We may choose to vertically integrate more into things. We may find efficiencies elsewhere.